Welcome, friends. Please silence your phones. Washington, D.C. area students of the United Lodge of Theosophists meet here in Suite 230 at 4865A Cordell Avenue, Bethesda, Maryland, 20814 on Sundays at 11 a.m. All are invited. Today's presentation is on genius. Next Sundays is on the Four Noble Truths. At 12:30 p.m. on the first and third Sundays, we are currently having roundtable readings and discussions on the Bhagavad Gita and related notes. All work of this lodge is aimed at passing on, in their purity, the teachings of the ancient message from the Masters of Wisdom that H.P. Blavatsky brought to us and named Theosophy. It is up to each individual to make this powerful and common sense message a living power in their every thought and action. Please help by your attendance, time, and financial contributions to keep alive these teachings. They're very uplifting and they are absolutely necessary for the future of humanity. We are guided by the UOT Declaration printed on the back of our program. So we work independently and with each other to achieve a truer realization of the self, a profounder conviction of universal brotherhood. We hold that the unassailable basis for union among Theosophists, wherever and however situated, is similarity of aim, purpose, and teaching. We have neither constitution, bylaws, nor officers. The sole bond between associates is the furtherance of unity. All who are engaged in the true service of humanity are regarded as Theosophists without distinction of race, creed, sex, condition, or organization, and we welcome to our association all those who are in accord with the purposes of our declaration and who desire to fit themselves by study and otherwise to be the better able to help and teach others. The true Theosophist belongs to no cult or sect, yet belongs to each and all. Today's reading is from the Dhammapada, here in chapter 3 on mind. Just as a fletcher makes straight his arrow, the wise man makes straight his crooked thinking. This is difficult to guard. This is hard to restrain. Likened to a fish snatched from its watery home and cast on land, the mind trembles and quivers, leaving the domain of Mara. Thinking is difficult to discipline. Mind is flighty, alighting where it listeth. Good is to tame it. The tame mind is the bearer of happiness. Let a wise man watch his thinking. The mind moves with extreme subtlety and is not noticed. It seizes whatever it desires. To watch the mind is conducive to happiness. He who controls his mind escapes the bondage of Mara. the mind is incorporeal, moves alone, travels far, and rests in the cave of the heart. Wisdom fills not the unsteady mind of the man of ruffled serenity. He is ignorant of the true teaching. Fear there is not for him whose mind is not burning with desires, and which, having risen above likes and dislikes, is serene. He is awakened. Looking upon his body to be fragile as an earthen jar, valuing his mind as a firm fortress, like a man fighting Mara with the sword of wisdom, let him guard what he has gained, but let him fight on. Ere long, alas, will the body lie on earth, cast aside, bereft of consciousness, useless as a burnt faggot. Whatever an enemy may do to an enemy, whatever a hater may do to a hater, a wrongly directed mind will do to us greater harm. Not a mother, not a father, nor any kindred can do match. A well-directed mind does as great a service than any of these. Thank you, and the talk on Genius is coming up now, and next week is on the Four Noble Truths.
Good morning and welcome, friends. The mind is always a very interesting subject to discuss, but in philosophical discussions, one thing must be remembered, and we will put it up here first, because genius is definitely related to the mind and its functioning in which direction. There's only one mind, but it works in two different ways. And we always say there is a higher, just for specificity, and a lower. And the higher is independent in the sense that it is on the field of chitta. It has its own field of operation, and it goes with the divine aspect of human nature. So this goes towards divinity. What about the lower? This is intellectual. And everybody thinks that this gets shortchanged in these discussions, but it doesn't, because where our human nature is today, as the fifth sub of the fifth root, is kamic. So it tends towards the personal. So what instigates it? Desire. We have to remember this. It's important. So in the reading, this is what has been explained, because to control it means going towards the higher. If we let this one take over, it considers itself sum total. I'll put it here. Sum total does not allow the other to have any say in anything that we do. Why? Because the higher mind is not of this earth. This one is, because it's desire driven. That one is not. What instigates it to work in the right direction is altruistic work. Altruistic meaning selflessness. This is self, personal. The other one is selfless. And remember, this philosophy is mainly directed towards selflessness. And the Gita says you have to learn to move in that direction, and it instigates humanity to become selfless. And the second thing it imparts to us is action. Here again, the mind, it says, is very difficult to control, but if we don't make an effort towards controlling it, we will never learn to do it, because there is no other way to do it but self-effort. Having said that, now we will talk about genius. And we will start this talk with a poem. This is by George Crabbe, who was an English poet. He says, "Genius, thou gift of heaven, thou light divine, amid what dangers art thou doomed to shine? Oft will the body's weakness check thy force, oft damp thy vigor and impede thy course, and trembling nerves compel thee to restrain thy nobler efforts to contend with pain or want. Said guest." Now, in the writings it says that the mystery of the mind, from the societal perspective, has never been solved. And the question is applicable to genius as well, because how are we defining it? From which perspective? So, genius, its reason, causes, its excessive rarity, what is it due to? Is it a gift from heaven? And if so, why some people should get this gift and have this higher mind express itself, and some should act like idiots or fools? Why should one receive one gift and the other the lower gift? Why? So, how are we to regard the appearance of men and women of genius? Is it an accident? Is it a blind chance? Or is it dependent on physical causes alone, which is only thinkable to a materialist? So, the author truly says, there remains then only this alternative: to agree with the believer in a personal God, quotation, to refer to the appearance of every single individual to a special act of divine will and creative energy, or to recognize in the whole succession of such individuals one great act of will expressed in an eternal, inviolable law. And genius, defined by Coleridge, Samuel Taylor Coleridge, also a poet and critic, he says, "To every outward appearance, at least, the faculty of growth, yet to the inward intuition of man, it is a question whether it is genius, an abnormal aptitude of mind that develops and grows, or the physical brain, its vehicle, which becomes through some mysterious process fitter to receive and manifest from within outwardly the innate and divine nature of man's oversoul." Perchance, we're told, the unsophisticated wisdom of the philosophers of old came closer to identifying genius in its true meaning with a tutelar deity, a spirit whom they called genius. So, and they called it genius, that tutelar deity. So, it says, the substance of this entity, to say nothing of its essence, and we're reminded to please observe the distinction, that there is a distinction between its substance and its essence, because it manifests itself according to the organism of the person it informs. So, we call this self. This one here, the lower, this self, right? So that self can only come through the physical body and express the higher aspect of our mind if the physical body is suitable to do so. So then, according to this definition, it's not the higher self that can by itself do miracles, but that we have to prepare our physical body to be able to channel that light through. It's the only way it can come through and inform. Shakespeare says of the genius of great men, what we perceive of his substance, he says, is not here. That's very interesting. The substance is not here. For what you see is but the smallest part. But were the whole frame here, it is of such a spacious, lofty pitch, your roof were not sufficient to contain it. What's he talking about? Shakespeare obviously had insights to what he's talking about. Are we just the physical body? We talk about 7 sheaths, do we not? Is this the real one? No, this is the solid aspect of it. But the real one is the inner man. It's the astral man. That's where our true heart is. But just because we don't see it and it is ethereal, it does not mean it is not there. We're assured until our own eye opens to assume that it is there. Science does not accept this, even though the scientists that are dealing with the psychological field know that there is an electromagnetic field around each human person. So it's there, it's there. We just have to accept that it is there until we can prove it to ourselves. So this is precisely what the esoteric philosophy teaches. The flame of genius, it says, is lit by no anthropomorphic hand, save that of one's own spirit. It is the very nature of the spiritual entity itself, or our ego, which keeps on weaving new lifebooks into the web of incarnation on the loom of time, from the beginnings to the ends of the great life cycle. The great life cycle is a tremendous period of time, and in the ocean, the time periods are assigned to these yugas as well as the Maha Manvantara. The Maha Manvantara, where all this work by humanity is done, is 311 trillion 40 billion years. It's a tremendous period of time, so it is divided into smaller cycles, and we are now in Kali Yuga. $432 million years, this duration. So we need to not condense ourselves into very short time period, because our work is spread all through. And there are 4 yugas: the gold, silver, bronze, and dark. And we are in the dark age, and the dark age is not just in the West, but India is also in it. So the East and West, and especially India and the West, is in Kali Yuga. And it says here that this spiritual entity asserts itself stronger than in the average man through its personality, so that what we call the manifestations of genius in a person are only the more or less successful efforts of the ego to assert itself on the outward plane of its objective form. In other words, the man of clay, in the matter-of-fact daily life of the latter. So here we go. It can only express itself through the physical body. It does not belong to this level of consciousness. It's not of this earth. Secret doctrine in many places refer to us being made of stardust. So we need to think about our astral sheath, which has 7 levels, and what it is made up of. So it has we have affinity in ours to the stars. We're not of this earth. We are totally not of this earth. We're not of this earth. So it is said that the egos of Newton Aeschylus or Shakespeare are of the same essence and substance, as well as the egos of a yokel, a fool, an idiot. So we are all made of the same material, and we have that same soul, inner man, in us. The self-assertion of their informing geni depends on the physiological and material construction of the physical man. No ego differs from another ego in its primordial, original essence and nature. So all egos are of the same substance and spirit. Our egos is made of the same substance, only the clay on the outside is of earth, but the inner man is not. And so we are made of the same substance, and the ego is the same in each human being, because the light of the higher comes from the same logoic center of that spiritual light. So, that which makes one mortal man a great man and another a vulgar, silly person is the quality and makeup of the physical shell or casing, and the adequacy or inadequacy of brain and body to transmit and give expression to the light of the real inner man. And this upness or inupness in its turn is the result of karma. Karma in the sense of law. We are all under its sway. We cannot consider our being in this incarnation but as a result of the previous ones that we have had. No human soul can appear on the scene at a developmental stage without having gone through the previous cycles as well. So that is just a given. It's law. And another simile is used here. It says, the physical man is the musical instrument and the ego is the performing artist. I really like that statement. So the ego is the performing artist, but the musical instrument is the human body. And if the human body is cracked like a cracked fiddle, it's not going to have harmonious sound come through it, will it? That's what they're actually getting at. So that faultless harmony has to have a sound instrument to come through. So the fidelity of the transmission then to the objective plane from that higher plane depends on the human body and what it is made up of, and all of the sheaths working in a coordinated manner in order for that inner light to come through. So, all of the ancient nations, if you look historically backwards, the Chaldees, the old Persians, the Hebrew, Kabbalistic Hebrews, the Gnostic Christian fathers, India with its Vedic lore, the East with Upanishads, Chinese, all of them understood this philosophy at its root. They knew that this was the truth. They did not question it because they understood it. Each then of those nations had their own mysteries and the hierophants that saw to it that yearly ceremonies, or how would we call that, initiation processes took place, in other words, and those souls who were ready to be initiated into the mysteries were then initiated. But in the secret doctrine we were told that the metaphysical truths could not be equally taught to all nations. In other words, they were given a portion of it according to the area, culture, what the mind could understand, and the other part, the masses, were allowed to approach these with the greatest caution, with the farthest limit of fact. So from the divine all proceeded Amun, the divine wisdom. Give it not to the unworthy, says a book of Hermes. Paul, the wise master builder, in his letter to the Corinthians, echoes thought Hermes when telling the Corinthians, we speak wisdom among them that are perfect, the initiated, divine wisdom in a mystery, even the hidden mystery. Yet to this day it is stated, the ancients are accused of blasphemy and fetishism for their hero worship. But in all of the writings it is stated that the historians never fathomed the true cause of such worship. Otherwise, we would understand what that worship stood for, why the honors were rendered to such men of clay. But it wasn't the personality it was being extended to, it was the hero or the saint that was being honored on these special occasions. And the Roman Church, it says, beautifies the body rather than the soul, but the divine imprisoned spirit, the exile God within that personality, was the one that was honored. So in the profane world, even the magistrates, the archons of Athens, that whose duty it was to prepare the city, it's called a procession, were ignorant of the true significance of what was actually happening. So Paul is right in declaring that it is the mystery, the hidden wisdom that he's talking about. So none of the archons were aware of the hidden mysteries themselves. And it is mentioned that if the chapters of 2 and 3 of 1 Corinthians were ever translated correctly, this is HPB telling us that even their dead letter is disfigured, she says, the world might receive strange revelations and understand, among other things, the ancient paganism of hero worship. And this is the reason why every citizen bowed in reference to him who was so feasted on that day, and the priest and poet had this zeal to immortalize them after their death. So, behold, it says, in every manifestation of genius, when combined with virtue, in the warrior or the bard, the great painter, artist, the statesman or man of science, who soars high above the heads of vulgar herd, the undeniable presence of the celestial exile, the divine ego, whose jailer thou art, O man of matter. Thus that which we call deification applied to the immortal God within, not to the dead walls of the human tabernacle that contained him. Occultism then, which is expressed in the books called Theosophy for the 19th century, which continues on now, teaches nothing new in asserting this, the discussion that we have just conducted. But it enlarges upon the metaphysical truism by giving it its finishing touch and details. It teaches, for instance, that the presence in man of various creative powers, called genius in their collection, is due to no blind chance, but to innate qualities through, or not to any innate qualities through hereditary tendencies, though that which is known as that may often intensify these faculties, but to an accumulation of individual antecedent experiences of the ego in its preceding life and lives. For though omniscient in its essence and nature, it still requires experience through its personalities of the things of earth, earthy on the objective plane, in order to apply the fruition of that abstract omniscience to them, and adds that the cultivation of certain aptitudes through a long series of past incarnation or incarnations must finally culminate in some one life in a blooming forth of genius in one or another direction. These various creative powers are listed in Secret Doctrine 1. I believe they start somewhere in 292, and you can look them up. And it is these powers that come naturally to the divine human being who has become divine on the physical plane. In other words, its love and care is for humanity in general, not personal but impersonal, and that is when divinity comes right through, the light shines right through. So then, great genius is true, if it is true and innate, is not merely an abnormal expansion of our human intellect, can never copy or condescend to imitate, but will always be original, in other words, sui generis, in its creative impulses and realizations. True genius needs but an opportunity to spring forth into existence and blossom in the sight of all in the most arid soul, for its stamp is always unmistakable. And the more it is suppressed and hidden, the greater will be the flood of light when that sudden eruption occurs. On the other hand, artificial genius, so often confused with the former, and in truth is but the outcome of long studies and training, will never be more than the flame of a lamp burning outside the portal of the pane. It may throw a long trail of light across road, but it leaves the inside of the building in darkness. So, we're referring here to the faculty and property in nature as being dual. Each may be made to serve two ends, evil as well as good. So will artificial genius betray itself eventually. Born out of the chaos of terrestrial sensations, of perceptive and retentive faculties, yet of finite memory. Now this is important. This is finite. What about that one? Infinite. It's universal. Finite memory. It will ever remain the slave of its body, and that body, owing to its unreliability and the natural tendency of matter to confusion, will not fail to lead even the greatest genius, so-called, back into its own primordial element, which is chaos, evil or earth. Thus, between the true and artificial genius, one born from the light of the immortal ego, the other from the evanescent will of the wisp of the terrestrial or purely human intellect and the animal soul, there is a tremendous chasm to be spun only by him who aspires ever onward, who never loses sight, even when in the depths of matter, or that guiding star, which is the divine soul and mind, or what we call buddhi manas. What's buddhi? Wisdom, wisdom, discernment, and the other one, as we talked about, is the mind. The latter does not require, as does the former, cultivation. The intellectual mind, we can become, she says, intellectual giants from one life to another, pursuing one line of thought. We can become a great philosopher, we can become a great mathematician, we can become a great scientist, but it's on the intellectual level, because it's coming to you through life after life of experience and knowledge-based expansion. It's not the light of the higher. This is through effort that you're collecting this knowledge. So it's coming through cultivation. The words of the poet who asserts that the lamp of genius, if not protected, pruned and fed with care, soon dies or runs to waste with fitful glare, can only apply to this artificial intelligence, not the true one. It is not the direct light of the Manasaputra, the sons of wisdom, for true genius, lit at the flame of our higher nature or the ego, cannot die, ever, cannot die. So then, who are the Manasaputra? We talked about it quite a bit. The Secret Doctrine talks about it. You can look it up in the index and it will give you a tremendous explanation in there. But the Manasaputra, briefly put, are the beings who lit the mind. In the middle of the third race, the giants, when we solidified enough, they lit the mind. But there was a war, remember, that the Secret Doctrine talks about between the heavens and earth, because some of the Kumaras said that the physical form was not fit for them to occupy, and they refused it. So that is when some mindless interactive processes took place between the animal and human kingdom, and you can read about that in the Secret Doctrine too. However, the Manasaputras incarnated physically in human form in order to light the mind and make us thinking human beings, without which we would not be any different than any other animal on earth. We, as physical human beings, are highest animals on earth because we are physically representative of that development. But because we have a mind and we are thinking entities, we reason. We don't have to go with this, we can reason. And this is when watching the threshold of the mind occurs. I've run out of time. Okay, let's see what else we can add. So, this cultivation that needs protection, pruning, and feeding is not the true genius. It's just it's the opposite. And I think it was Lavater who said that this true genius is like 1 in 10 million, whereas the artificial one can be 1 in 1 million. So let's put artificial here. So artificial versus true. So in the modern paradoxical way of explaining, it says genius is vain and self-sufficient. There's another one, and then narrows it with his own eccentricity of his own mind and does not allow it through expression. And then some says inflammable constitution will even show it a prey to every passion but seldom delicacy of taste. So that is artificial. It cannot be the true genius. In view of this philosophy, such grand altruistic characters such as Buddha and Jesus and a few of their close imitators, it says, can be regarded in our historical cycle as fully developed genius. True genius is a synonym of self-existent and infinite mind, mirrored more or less faithfully by man, fails to find in the modern definitions of the term anything approaching correctness because of this play in the upper and higher mind understanding. So, one last statement here. It says that it is only the so-called uneducated masses, just because of that lack of sophistry or sophisticated reasoning in them, who feel, whenever coming in contact with an abnormal, out-of-the-way character, that there is in him something more, not just mercy that we see in mortal flesh with intellectual abilities, that there is something more that they cannot put their finger to it. And HPB's article on the subject says that when things are explained from the philosophical aspect of this perspective, they're normally tagged as superstition. But then she says, what exactly is superstition? She says that there is definitely an invisible and unseen part of our universe, but it is not empty. And we should not allow our mind to fill it in as to what it has, because in reality, it's full of life. Just because we don't see it, it doesn't mean it doesn't exist. So then superstition becomes, she says, not an unreasonable feeling of half wonder and half dread, mixed with admiration and reverence or fear, according to the dictates of our own intuition. And she says this is far more reasonable than to repeat with the two learned wiseacres that there is nothing whatever in that darkness, because they have failed to discern it. So we'll just stop it here and answer your questions. Yeah. Yes.
From a mostly scientific perspective, the student understands that we as individuals are some combination of our mother, our father, and ourselves as a reincarnation being, which really, when you think about it, we incarnate there because we choose to incarnate to our mother and our father. Is that kind of along the lines of what you're saying here too? We bring about, and through self-effort, become a genius.
Well, yes, but you don't become a genius in one lifetime. Obviously, you bring the aptitude with you because you have been working in that line of inquiry and search and finding the answers for a long period of time, a series of lifetimes perhaps. But that is cultivation. That is the artificial intelligence that you're referring to. It's not the real one. Artificial intelligence comes when the lower self, through intellectual processes from life to life to life to life, can become a giant in science, a giant in philosophy, however, whatever field it chooses, it works with it. And that is this intellectual capacity you're referring to. But nevertheless, it's your intellectual self. It has nothing to do with your higher divine self. And as long as that higher divine self cannot express itself through your body, you are not a real genius. And look whom she called a genius. Jesus, Buddha, Sankaracharya, those few. Tsongkhapa is one of them as well. What about the Gita? Arjuna and Krishna. Who's Krishna? Do we ask these questions? Because there was a real one 5,000 years ago, and his death signified beginning of Kali Yuga. So these are truths that are given to us, but she says the skepticism colors it. Let me see what she said here. Yeah. She says here, genius and undeserved suffering prove an immortal ego and reincarnation in our world. As to the rest, the obloquy and derision with which such theosophical doctrines are met, Fielding, this is Henry Fielding, who was an English author, a sort of genius, Fielding she is referring to, a sort of genius in his way too, has covered our answer over a century ago. Never did he utter a greater truth than on the day he wrote that if superstition makes a man a fool, skepticism makes him mad. In other words, we have now in the 21st century have developed the mind to such a degree that we do not accept dogma at face value because we have become thinking human beings. We can think for ourselves. If the philosophy sits right, we accept it. If it doesn't, we don't. We don't have to. But look what happens. You're changing it, right? You're going from one thing to another to another. You're searching for the truth. And as you find more reliable information, you drop the previous one and accept the new stuff. But that is not an expression of divinity, is it? Because the truth is always the same. It never ever changes. Its mode of giving or how the wisdom holders give it to certain areas of the population on all around the world might differ from age to age depending what language it is coming in and to what culture it is coming. But what it expresses is always the same. It never changes. So when you choose to incarnate from age to age, the choosing is the most suitable environment that the soul can incarnate into in order to express what it has come to do, so that affinity is there to the family, the characteristics of the family, and so forth. So it incarnates there. Sometimes Mr. Judd says it chooses the most arid circumstances because it needs to experience that particular difficulty in order to grow with. In other words, it's all our choosing as to where we're going to incarnate, but that only does this. But what we need to do in this age, which is the 21st century, is to become aware as to how the mind functions and learn to control the lower through meditation.
I think you kind of answered this, but there are those who seem like they're born spiritually inclined or with a higher mind, toward the higher mind.
Mm-hmm.
And there are others who seem to be more worldly. Now they are, again, they've developed themselves to that point. But there was a time when they, as humanity, this student understands it, chose not to all be geniuses. So we have to overcome that. We're talking about an immense period of time. You talked about history. It's not recorded in the current history books, but it's referred to in the documents behind you there. So we have to overcome what we did before as Atlanteans and develop our physical bodies so that we are spiritually inclined?
Well, your question is really has many sections in it, and it's a very loaded question. It's a talk on its own. Mm-hmm. Now, we said that the Manasaputras, the Kumaras, they are the beings who occupy the constellation Capricornus. It's in the secret doctrine. Lighted manas, and in the middle of the third race, when the physical body became solidified, they incarnated. Now, but that interactive process in some cases already took place because of the mindlessness of humanity. In the fourth race, we were still, as Atlanteans, a spiritual race. All our spiritual faculties were intact. So there's a difference in the activity of the human soul through a physical body, but its mind is not activated, so you're just responsible for a physical act, right? The mind not activated, so physical responsibility here. But in the fourth race, Atlanteans, the mind is lighted. What else is active? The pineal gland is active, which is the most spiritual gland in the human body. And it sees to the front and to the back. In other words, when we chose to do wicked things, we did it by choice. One half of the Atlanteans were spiritual, the other turned towards physical. It's always like that. Humanity is always divided because of the opposite qualities in existing in all of us. It just depends how we are going to use our new abilities. Half of the Atlanteans chose not to go with their physical aspect, but to retain the spiritual aspect in conjunction with the physical, and the other half submerged themselves into the physical and gave into that propensity. Now, we are the fifth, we're the Aryan race. In the Aryan race, we're all Atlanteans, Mr. Judge tells us in his writing. Because of the freedom of the mind in the West, we're all incarnating again. That's very interesting. Freedom of mind, we're all incarnating. And look at around you and see what is happening to our society, and you would understand what he's referring to. They knew what would happen. He's talking about the skepticism. He says that when the old philosophies are thrown out of the window, excuse me, dogma, for instance, because the human mind is very, very intelligent. We can think for ourselves, as said. So it's throwing it out. But what is it replacing it with? What are we replacing this dogma with? Okay, throw it out. Okay, what happens to our psychological conditioning? What about our ethics? Because Judge says, okay, the ethics of Jesus is not followed by any church or any human being in the 21st century. He's writing this back then, and he's telling us we're not following it. If the Christian nations were to follow Christ's commandments, he said this would have been a golden age a long time ago. But no nation on earth will accept the commandments as being realities to live through, rather than a set of compliance statements. That if we set our inner life to what it was said, we would have brought the golden age a long time ago into existence, but we didn't. So the Atlanteans then had the pineal gland, which is our spiritual eyesight, open, and they chose to do what? They destroyed land masses. They destroyed nations on earth. And so eventually they sank. We sank. We're Atlanteans, we sank. Why? Because we did not complete our cycle. We were so wicked that what does Krishna tell us in the Gita, from age to age, he says, I incarnate so that the wickedness can be controlled and the goodness can be brought forth again. So we sank into the ocean, Atlantic Ocean. So in this one, we were the ones that committed the acts with the animal kingdom were mindless. They were simply just physical. This one has tremendous spiritual consequences, and so that's the difference. So during that period, we were divided, one following the spiritual side and the other the physical. And in this 21st century, it isn't that we haven't given opportunity and philosophy, because it's all written in the secret doctrine, Isis Ocean, universal philosophy of RC, echoes from the Orient, Dhammapada, Voice of the Silence, the Gita. All these books recorded the truth that was brought out. We can read them, make them our own, accept them or reject them according to how we can absorb it. But it is the responsibility of each human soul with this mind to figure out for itself what it is going to do. We cannot have authority in this 21st century telling us what to do. We're intelligent enough to make our own choices. And that is why it requires self-induced effort, because any other way we will not get there. No one is going to teach us how to control this lower mind. We have to learn to control it for ourselves. And some circles do not even accept the functioning of the mind. They're not aware of it. It's not a known field operation that, well, the East knows it because they know what chitta is, but the West, that there is a mind field all on its own and it functions independently. Where's our scientific world? They're getting closer and closer to it, but to accept it, they have to then accept that there is a astral field operation. When the atom disappears from the physical plane, it means it has moved to a higher plane.
So you're leaving me no gray area to operate in. It's either one way or the other. It's not.
Well, no,
I'm not reading this as
it doesn't mix.
anything.
It does not mix. This does not mix. It's either one or the other. If you become a skeptic and you say, yeah, it has no value for me, I'm not going to accept this, well, it's your choice. But Fielding said that makes you mad. Because if you don't go with the truth, what are you going with? Untruth. Who are you following? What part of you are you following? Remember, at the end of each life, this lower self is going to drop off. And it does, because we get a new body, a new psychological makeup in each lifetime, but the skandhas are there. How you use those things is how you determine what your next life is going to be. And if you don't fight it to the best of your ability to overcome it, that takes over, because it fools you. You read it in the mind section of the Dhammapada that it's insidious. It makes it look like it's real and fools you, and you go along with it. You see it all around. Yes? Yes?
It seems like the definition of a genius is a little different than sort of the more commonly used, because many geniuses that we would think as the artists and the musicians, many actually were not that spiritual and were very disturbed people in real life. Mm-hmm. So it's a little bit different type of genius.
Yeah, it's this intellectual, artificial kind of genius.
Mm-hmm.
So
It comes.
Partial genius?
No, there's no partial anything. It's artificial because it's intellectual aspect of you. It's the lower aspect. So
they aren't geniuses.
It's artificial genius, but it expresses itself in that way. She says that it does, because you have gained that personal experience from life to life to life. Maybe you were playing that musical instrument from life to life to life, and you have become an expert. And so you're classified as a genius. But you also have those examples where people rise to a tremendous height, and then the next is they fall very fast. So that is why, because it's artificial, it does not come from Buddhi Manas. This higher expression comes from the noumenal world, where the truth is, whereas the other one is from the phenomenal side of events. But nevertheless, it is classified as genius, but she differentiates between the two as real and artificial. And even in her century, she says that differentiation was looked as superstition. Yeah. She was aware of it, that it's not accepted. But is it accepted today is the question. How have we improved the mind field? Are we any closer to understanding our own divinity? It's a real question. Okay, thank you for coming. Please join us next week for the Four Truths, Four Noble Truths. Thank you.